The relentless glare of the global spotlight has a peculiar way of distorting reality, transforming the complex lives of those born into supreme privilege into highly curated public narratives. For decades, the collective imagination has been utterly captivated by the internal dynamics of the world's most famous family, tracking every gesture, every disagreement, and every dramatic departure with an insatiable appetite for spectacle. In the modern media landscape, we have become accustomed to a specific type of royal narrative, one dominated by public grievances, high-profile legal battles, and emotional declarations broadcast from across the Atlantic Ocean. We watch as individuals who were once central to the institutional tapestry choose to dismantle their connection to the past, arguing that the pressures of their birthright were too heavy a burden to bear in silence. This constant friction between tradition and modern individual desire has created a polarized audience, one that alternately sympathizes with the plight of the modern exile and romanticizes the stoic endurance of those who remain within the palace walls. Yet, beneath the sensational headlines that dominate our daily news feeds, there lies a much quieter, far more fascinating study in contrasts that often goes entirely unnoticed by the casual observer. It is a story about how different people handle the specific cards they are dealt by fate, and how true resilience is rarely found in the loudest rooms or the most expensive public relations campaigns. If you find these deep explorations into the hidden dynamics of public figures compelling, please consider taking a brief moment to subscribe to our channel so you never miss our deep dives into the stories that shape our cultural landscape. When examining the concept of the secondary royal figure, the individual who exists outside the immediate line of succession but remains permanently trapped within the orbit of the crown, our minds instantly drift to the most vocal figures of the current generation. We think of bitter recriminations, of legal crusades against media empires, and of a profound sense of unfairness regarding the secondary status imposed by birth. However, history shows us that this exact position has been occupied before, and the manner in which it was negotiated offers a striking blueprint for an entirely different living. Long before the current era of high-stakes media warfare, another younger son struggled to find his footing within the rigid hierarchy of the British state, navigating an obstacle course of public ridicule, professional failure, and deeply embarrassing personal missteps. This individual was once widely perceived as a pampered, somewhat fragile youth, someone who enjoyed the immense fruits of royal privilege while lacking the grit required to fulfill traditional institutional expectations. He was a prince who openly dabbled in commercial ventures, who sought a career in the creative arts, and who repeatedly found himself the target of intense media mockery for choices that seemed entirely unbecoming of his status. Yet, instead of allowing these early humiliations to curdle into a lifelong sense of victimhood, he chose a path of quiet assimilation, gradually transforming himself from a national punchline into one of the most reliable and dutiful servants of the state. The journey through the treacherous waters of public life for this particular prince was anything but smooth, marked by a series of high-profile disasters that would have permanently alienated many from their families and their public duties. There was the brutal, highly publicized curtailment of a costly military career, a decision that drew widespread accusations of soft living and a lack of moral fiber from a disappointed public. There were the bizarre, deeply cringeworthy appearances in flamboyant historical costumes on television programs that reduced the dignity of the ancient institution to the level of a slapstick game show. Later came the founding of a commercial television production company that constantly teetered on the brink of financial and ethical disaster, culminating in a severe scandal when his film crews breached royal protocol by filming his own young nephew during his university years. Each of these episodes was met with a torrent of media hostility and public derision that rivals any modern press campaign, presenting a seemingly endless cycle of public trial and tribulation. A weaker personality might have reacted by striking back at the system, by launching furious public counterattacks, or by retreating into a wealthy, resentful exile, while demanding constant apologies from everyone else. Instead, this figure chose to bear the weight of his own errors with a sturdy, unspoken dignity. quietly absorbing the blows without ever demanding that the world bend to his personal grievances or validate his internal struggles. This delicate balance of hard-won respectability was suddenly put to the test this very week, as the ghosts of a long-forgotten youth came rushing back into the public domain through the pages of an explosive new book. The past has a dangerous habit of refusing to remain buried, particularly when it involves the glamorous, uninhibited world of the West End theatrical stage during the late 1980s. For a now respectable, happily married 62-year-old Duke, who has spent the last 2 decades painstakingly rebuilding his reputation as a model of dull, dependable duty, the sudden publication of these intimate memoirs represents a fresh and deeply unpredictable public trial. The revelations emerge from the unvarnished autobiography of a prominent musical theater star, dragging a man who thought he had secured a quiet, dignified twilight back into the lurid glare of the tabloid headlines. The narrative transports the public back to a time when this young prince, having controversially walked away from his military obligations, sought refuge and a new identity in the creative chaos of theatrical production. It was an era of intense passion, youthful indiscretion, and a collision between the rigid protocols of Buckingham Palace and the free-spirited, uninhibited culture of the chorus line, setting the stage for a revelation that completely recontextualizes our understanding of this quiet public servant. The explosive pages of this new autobiography, titled The Showgirl and the Prince, paint a remarkably vivid picture of a 5-year relationship that began in the late 1980s. A period when the young prince was desperately attempting to forge an independent identity away from the heavy expectations of his family. The author, West End star Ruthie Henshall, pulls back the curtain on a passionate and highly unconventional affair that commenced in 1988, when both she and the prince were employed by Andrew Lloyd Webber's famous theater production company. At the time, she was a vibrant 20-year-old performer playing the role of Jemima in the hit musical Cats, while he was a 23-year-old royal dropout who had shocked the nation by resigning his commission in the Royal Marines to pursue his dream of working in commercial theater. The text describes a striking lack of subtlety in how the relationship began, with the ambitious young performer making an immediate and determined line for the royal newcomer the moment she realized a prince was working on the premises. She admits in her writing that her motivations were partly driven by the sheer novelty and prestige of attracting the attention of a member of the royal family, using a blunt, uninhibited style of flirting that the sheltered young royal had likely never encountered before within the polite confines of palace society. This highly charged theatrical courtship quickly escalated into a full-blown romance that frequently breached the heavily guarded borders of royal privacy. The memoirs describe a free-spirited young woman who would routinely arrive to meet the prince wearing revealing short skirts and dramatic footwear, deliberately bringing the provocative energy of the stage into his structured world. The text recounts various socially daring moments, including an episode at a lively party where she openly informed the prince that she was not wearing any undergarments, making it abundantly clear that she was entirely available to keep him company whenever he required amusement at Windsor Castle. The sheer boldness of this approach proved utterly irresistible to the young royal, who found himself completely overwhelmed by the uninhibited confidence of his new companion. Before long, the relationship progressed to the point where the musical theater performer was regularly spending nights in the prince's private quarters at Buckingham Palace, a development that reportedly led his mother, Queen Elizabeth, to dryly express her concern about her youngest son bringing chorus girls into the family home. The intimate details contained within the memoir offer a fascinating, if intensely embarrassing, glimpse into the domestic realities of a young royal living away from the public gaze. The author recalls with sharp clarity the moment their physical relationship was consummated, noting that the prince took great care in undressing her and leading her to his bed, proving himself to be romantic, gentle, and highly experienced in romantic matters. In a particularly humorous and revealing detail that has since captured the attention of the global media, she mentions noticing that the prince had his formal royal title, H.R.H. Edward, carefully embroidered directly into the labels of his undergarments. The narrative proceeds to describe an incredibly passionate affair, with the stage star boasts about frequently exhausting her royal lover into oblivion, leaving him completely bleary-eyed and exhausted when he was forced to rise early the following morning to attend to his official duties and royal obligations. For a man who is now a happily married duke with the respected Duchess of Edinburgh at his side and two mature children to protect from public scandal, the sudden exhumation of these highly descriptive, decades-old encounters presents an extraordinary challenge to his hard-won image of quiet respectability. Yet, despite the inherently uncomfortable nature of these public disclosures, the underlying portrait that emerges from the text is surprisingly positive, casting the prince in a remarkably decent and human light. While it is entirely evident that the young royal never intended for this passionate affair to become a matter of public record, and certainly never viewed the uninhibited showgirl as a potential candidate for a royal marriage, he did not hide her away in the shadows of his life. Instead, he took the significant step of introducing her to his immediate family, bringing her into the inner sanctum of the monarchy where she spent extended periods of time at both the Balmoral estate in Scotland and the historic grounds of Windsor Castle. Remarkably, the memoir notes that the members of the royal family and their extensive household staff were consistently warm, welcoming, and exceptionally kind to the young performer, completely overlooking her coarse language, her lack of traditional upper-class etiquette, and her highly unconventional background. This revelation of institutional warmth stands in stark and dramatic contrast to the historical narrative put forward by other high-profile royal outsiders in recent years, most notably the Duchess of Sussex, who famously described a cold, hostile, and utterly unsupportive atmosphere when she first encountered the inner workings of the British monarchy. This profound difference in experience raises fascinating questions about the true nature of the palace environment, suggesting that perhaps the reality is far more dependent on the individual personalities involved and the specific eras in which these encounters occurred. It is entirely possible that the West End performer possessed a much healthier, far more realistic understanding of how the royal institution operated, enabling her to navigate its complex social landscape without developing a deep sense of personal grievance or institutional resentment. Furthermore, she possessed the immense advantage of having a calm, steady, and remarkably equable prince at her side to gently guide her through the numerous social pitfalls of royal life. The text reveals that the prince was a deeply attentive and considerate partner, writing affectionate love notes, preparing simple meals like toasted cheese for her, spending quality time with her regular family, and ultimately letting her down with great gentleness when the relationship naturally reached its conclusion, allowing them to maintain a genuine friendship that endured for decades. The stark contrast between the two younger brothers of the royal house became blindingly obvious during this extraordinary week, as both men dominated international front pages in completely characteristic fashion. While the Duke of Edinburgh quietly weathered the public airing of his colorful past, his nephew across the Atlantic was launching yet another explosive legal offensive against the British media structure. Following a highly publicized privacy trial that ended in complete legal defeat, the exiled prince reacted by issuing a furious, sweeping public statement that placed the blame for his failures squarely on everyone else, refusing to accept even a shred of personal responsibility for his predicament. This dramatic juxtaposition perfectly encapsulates the two paths available to those born into the shadow of the crown. On one side, we witness an endless crusade fueled by a deep sense of personal victimhood and a restless, chaotic desire to settle scores with the past. On the other side, we see a man who simply straightens his tie, accepts the awkward reality of his youthful indiscretions, and continues to perform his duties without a word of complaint. It is a powerful reminder that true character is not revealed by the absence of struggle or embarrassment, but by the dignity and poise with which one chooses to handle the inevitable storms of life. The broader landscape of British public life this week offered several other striking examples of individuals dealing with the heavy burdens of fate, talent, and public scrutiny under intensely challenging circumstances. On the pristine lawns of the All England Club, a brilliant young British tennis player named Arthur Ferry captured the hearts of the nation by sailing into the semifinals at Wimbledon against all conventional odds. Yet, almost immediately, the darker corners of the internet erupted into a wave of bitter criticism, with commentators dismissing his remarkable athletic achievements simply because his father happens to be a multi-millionaire businessman. This petty resentment entirely ignores the reality of elite sport, where no amount of ancestral wealth or expensive coaching can substitute for the raw talent, grueling work ethic, and immense mental fortitude required to win at the highest level of international competition. While countless children of privilege squander their lives in laziness, arrogance, or destructive habits, this young man chose to pour his energy into a punishing athletic discipline, proving that true merit cannot be bought with a silver spoon. And his hard-won triumph deserves to be celebrated with unreserved national pride rather than cynical jealousy, a far more profound and tragic study in the long-term consequences of human trauma unfolded with the news that the family of Stephen Lawrence, the young man whose brutal murder by racist thugs in 1993 reshaped British social history, continues to experience deep internal fractures. The sheer weight of such a catastrophic loss possesses a devastating ability to spread like a contagion through a family unit, slowly destroying even the strongest bonds over decades of shared grief. It was revealed this week that Stephen's mother, Doreen Lawrence, had taken the extraordinary step of exhuming her son's body from his final resting place in Jamaica and returning it to London, completely failing to inform her ex-husband, Neville Lawrence, of her actions. This agonizing division between two grieving parents highlights the tragic reality that deep emotional upheaval often drives people further apart rather than closer together. While the nation has long admired their public fight for justice, this deeply personal conflict illustrates the hidden, long-term human cost of historical tragedies, reminding us that the private wounds left by violence rarely heal in the way the public expects. In a completely different realm of historical reckoning, the descendants of Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be executed by hanging in Great Britain back in 1955, succeeded in securing a formal posthumous pardon from the Ministry of Justice. The state justified this modern intervention by pointing to extensive evidence of severe domestic abuse and coercive control that would be understood entirely differently under modern legal frameworks. While this decision was hailed by some as a triumph of modern empathy, critics argue that it represents a problematic exercise in historical virtue signaling that ignores the brutal reality of her crime, given that she shot her lover in cold blood at point-blank range outside a London establishment. By spending vast institutional resources on rewriting the narratives of the distant past, the legal system risks distracting itself from the far more urgent task of correcting contemporary miscarriages of justice that leave innocent people languishing in modern prisons. It raises complex questions about whether modern society is more interested in performing retroactive moral corrections than addressing the immediate practical failures of our current administrative structures. Meanwhile, the glittering world of international high fashion brought its own brand of dramatic spectacle to the streets of Paris during Haute Couture Week, providing a sharp contrast to these somber historical reflections. The event was dominated by striking visual statements from global icons like Gigi Hadid, who turned heads in a dramatic feathered Balenciaga headpiece, and Zendaya, who achieved a masterclass in avant-garde elegance by wearing an intricate mask inspired by the architecture of the Eiffel Tower. However, the atmosphere of pure artistic expression was somewhat disrupted by the arrival of Jennifer Lopez, who chose to wear a series of incredibly revealing, low-cut gowns that stretched the boundaries of both gravitational physics and traditional high society etiquette. At 56 years of age, the pop icon remains an unstoppable force of nature, completely indifferent to conventional standards of taste and determined to command the global spotlight through sheer theatrical bravado. This display of enduring ambition was mirrored in a far more endearing fashion by country music legend Dolly Parton, who announced that a grand musical production detailing her extraordinary life story will officially debut on Broadway this winter. proving that her creative drive remains completely undiminished as she enters her ninth decade. Ultimately, whether observing the high-stakes drama of international fashion, the bitter battles of historical justice, or the quiet endurance of a veteran prince, the underlying lesson of the week remains remarkably consistent. The world will always be filled with individuals who demand the spotlight, who complain about their perceived misfortunes, and who attempt to rewrite history to suit their personal narratives. Yet, as the noise of these modern controversies gradually fades into the background, it is the quiet, dignified figures, those who accept their past, perform their duties, and refuse to wallow in victimhood, who leave the most lasting impression on our collective consciousness. Prince Edward's ability to survive an explosive tabloid revelation with his dignity entirely intact proves that a life built on steady, uncomplaining service is far more resilient than one built on loud grievances and media grandstanding. In the grand theater of public life, the flashiest performers often burn out the fastest, while the quiet, dutiful figures endure, proving that true